How's it going, everybody? This is the Nitty Gritty. My name is Chad. With me, as usual, is Leonard. This is a show about wrestling. So today we're bringing you an episode that we really didn't talk about doing too far ahead of time, but it just kind of fell into place. And that is, we're going to be talking about the movie The Iron Claw, and then we're going to be talking about at least one of the actual matches that are featured in the movie. And we have done a movie review here before. We did a review of the classic Shutter Speed, right, Leonard?
Yes, this is a little bit better than Shutter
Yeah,
Speed,
yeah,
I would probably
it
say.
is. Yes.
And let me say too, I know most people listening, watching this know about the Von Erich family, but this is a fictional film. It's not a documentary, so I would guess some spoilers are probably going to come up. So I'll say that warning.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me just, before I give background on the movie, let me just kind of give, background about how I plan to approach this episode. Two of my hobbies slash loves are movies and wrestling. Hence why I got started at 411 Mania back in the day and met Leonard. So I was listening to a podcast before I got on here, and the one guy who's a big wrestling fan and a movie fan talked about how as a wrestling fan, you expect one thing out of a movie like this, and he was saying casual viewers maybe expect something different, and certainly if you're a movie reviewer, you look at different things. So like I kind of had those two halves, you know, coming together for this, and so we will, I'm sure, sound like we're nitpicking a little bit, but at least in my case, I'll say, right off the bat that I really liked this movie, and but I will also say that my introduction to the Von Erichs was not as somebody who watched WCCW and was living in and around Texas. Um, I first I knew who the Von Erichs were, but my first real introduction to them was as seeing the Texas Tornado carry Von Erich in WWF. That kind of gives away my age a little bit there. And as time went along, WWE released a great documentary about WCCW, which covers the story. And then Dark Side of the Ring also did a very good documentary, which covers this story. So as Leonard said, there will be spoilers. If you're watching our show, chances are you know about the Von Erich family and you know kind of what happened there. So just forewarning. But this movie was released December 22nd, 2023, and is directed by Sean Durkin. And he did Martha, Marcy, May, Marlene, which was a movie I thought was pretty solid. He also did the movie The Nest, which I have not seen. But this is his newest movie. And, apparently he was looking into boxing movies at one time. But, this is a story that kind of came up. And my wife does not know a lot about wrestling, obviously, only what I tell her. And so she didn't know about this story. And the only thing I said to her, and I told my kids this as well, is I said, this is one of the saddest stories in sports, period. That is kind of how I described it. So she didn't know what to expect. She watched it with me. And, obviously, plot summary wise, this covers the Von Erich family, their legacy, and the tragedies that occurred. That's just kind of a bullet point plot summary. But I will say that I really liked this movie a lot. I do have thoughts on it. But Leonard, why don't you, before we get into the details of the movie, just kind of briefly talk about your fandom history with the Von Erichs and
Sure.
all that?
Well, much like you, I think I first became aware of the Von Erichs via Kerry being in what was then the World Wrestling Federation. I did watch the Dark Side of the Ring episode. I did watch the documentary that the WWE had put out. I had that DVD. I was big into the WWE DVDs for a while. They were great comps. And
that was peak WWE documentary period.
Yeah. And maybe different from you, I have watched some world class on the network
Right.
and available online too, because I got interested in wanting to know more about it. So, and much like you too, my wife watched the movie with me. We went to the local theater to see it on Sunday, and she didn't know much about it. She had watched the trailer. I kind of told her in general who the Von Erichs were. Much like you, I told her this is a very tragic story. It's not a feel-good film.
Right.
It's a sad movie, so she knew kind of that going into it, and I would say that, and she liked it. She enjoyed it. Um, she thought it was very well made. She thought the acting was good. I agree with that. She had a few questions coming out of it, kind of like why some things were the way they were, or who some of the people were,
Right.
um, that type of thing, but nothing that really detracted too much. I would say it was incredibly good and incredibly tragic, and I don't see it being a film that a lot of people are going to watch more than once because of the emotional wallop that it gives you.
Well, yeah. So, when I first joined 411, my view on movies that ended on a downer is much different than it is now. Because along the way, I realized that, some movies just aren't meant to be happy movies. That's just the way it is. It's happy, sad, scared. These are all emotions that we experience. And some movies are just sad. And this is a movie that has a lot of sad in it, and it ends on a note that is very true to the way Kevin Von Erich is in real life these days, which is a hopeful one.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, as far as watching it more than once, it's tougher as a wrestling fan because I probably would watch this more, like at least one more time. I watched it in a weird way at home. I didn't go to the theater because the we don't get out of the house much with our kids being around.
Understandable.
But I'm partial to wrestling documentaries, than I am wrestling biopics, fictionalized
Mm-hmm.
stories with them. Um, but yeah, I mean, my Stephanie said about this, she had questions, but the main thing that she kind of got hung up on was she thought that the editing was a little weird, and now that kind of leads to they're telling a very truncated version of a lot of these events and a lot of these tragedies.
Yes.
And that kind of like, could this have been a mini series? Absolutely. Absolutely, this could have been drawn out to 2 episodes of a series, and it would have gone into more detail. Like, she obviously didn't know a lot about who the Freebirds were, and
Mm-hmm.
when, in the one scene when Kerry comes home after winning the Intercontinental title, Fritz refers to Hellwig. Well, casual movie fans aren't going to know who that is, so
Mm-hmm.
I had to pause and tell her who that was referring to. Because there's a handful of details in here for wrestling fans, which is to Sean Durkin's credit, really.
Mm-hmm.
They're trying to
Uh,
do different.
Lance Von Erich being another.
Yeah, poor MJF. He had apparently a much larger role, and so that was another scene. I paused and I told her, I was like, "This is who he's supposed to be," and unfortunately, it's not a bigger scene, but this was something they did in
Mhm.
the actual territory. They brought this guy in, and her response was, "Well, that sounds like a really dumb idea." Like, well, it
Yeah,
was.
that's what Jenny said. I explained that to her as well, and she was like, "Yeah, that." I told her basically they ran out of Von Erichs,
Right.
and they just needed some more.
Right.
And two, I also had to explain to her who Jerry Jarrett was because she
Yeah.
gets he was buying the promotion, but where was he coming from? Like, who's this guy?
Right.
I had to explain who Jerry Jarrett was.
Right.
That was another one, and a big thing for her was Kerry Von Erich wins the NWA World Heavyweight title from Ric Flair. He rides a motorcycle. He doesn't have a foot. And Jenny
Right.
interpreted that as being that all happened the same night. Where in reality, that's like, I think, at least 2 years apart from each other.
Right. And you see, this goes into my wife's comment about the editing, which it, like, again, these are to me nitpicky things, but they're things that you notice, especially if you spent decades watching wrestling like Leonard and I have. So like these are just things that you notice. And even if you're a casual movie fan, like you notice, you're like, wait, you kind of have to see like what did all these things happen all at the same time. And I actually really liked, we're going to talk about that match later, but I actually really liked that scene in the kitchen with the belt because, and especially if you watch the match, which is not really featured in the movie, but like you watch the match and then you think about that scene, it's like this big, happy moment. And then, they're in the kitchen and it's just like, well, here the belt is, it's in the house. And it's like this moment of, was this was this worth it? Um,
Hmm.
and it's a poignant scene between two actors who give really really good performances. And before I touch on some of my a couple, like I had one major gripe and one minor gripe. We'll get to that, and I think
Okay.
our minor gripe is Leonard is probably the same thing. Uh,
Yes, because I did give you some brief thoughts of mine via text after
yeah.
seeing it. Yeah.
But this is to me the best performance that Zac Efron has ever done. Um,
Not that I've seen everything that he's done, but if you go back to High School Musical, I would definitely say probably.
yeah, and on the podcast I was listening to, they talked about, oh, could you have switched Jeremy Allen White and Zac Efron, and like you could have. Jeremy Allen White is probably the overall better rounded actor and is certainly bigger based on his popularity from The Bear and all that. But you know, like their argument on the podcast was that Zac Efron is such a bigger, stockier guy, and Jeremy Allen White is a little bit smaller. And they could have made it work if they like worked better if they switched. But I think that based on Jeremy Allen White's face and the hair and the way he carried himself as Carrie Von Erich, I think that that worked really really well.
When I first saw pictures of them, like from the movie, I thought White was Kevin, and I thought that Efren was going to be Carrie because of the body size.
Right.
Because Efren really got ripped, and I've actually went back and I've watched some stuff, and yeah, they were. He was way bigger than Kevin,
Right.
and but oddly enough, the guy that played David was about the right body type.
He looked a lot like David Von Erich.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, all the actors in this movie I thought gave really good performances. I thought they all had very good chemistry. Um, and the gentleman who plays Fritz Von Erich did really really well also. Um,
Holt McAnally. I had his name written down because I think he deserves. He probably won't get it, but a Best Supporting Actor Oscar nod. He looked like Fritz. He acted like Fritz. He talked like Fritz, and I like the fact that they didn't really make him a villain. He's a tough guy. He made some poor decisions, but he's not necessarily a bad guy, and you can understand his motivations. And I thought Holt played that character right down the proper middle way to make him sympathetic, but at the same time, you go, geez, guy, can't don't be such a jerk to your kids.
yeah, he's a very flawed human being. And was a flawed human being, and people will recognize that actor from Mindhunter, which I really really liked, and hope that it comes back someday. But he's very good as one of the leads in that as well. And yeah, I thought that the performances are what makes this movie. I liked how they film the in ring stuff. They kind of have to jump around to different points in the story and kind of squish a lot of stuff together. Um, Obviously, they kind of had the WWF stuff in the like kind of almost like a background. They couldn't feature it too much. I'm sure there were reasons for that. Um, but my minor gripe is well, I not I think I know my
Mhm.
minor gripe is probably the same as most people out there, wrestling fans who have seen this movie, and that is the gentleman who plays Ric Flair.
Yeah.
who is not good at doing it. And I have a theory as to why. I could be totally wrong, but I'm sure he did watch footage of Ric Flair. But to me, his performance strikes me as somebody who was paying more attention to what was written in the script and less on nailing Ric Flair and trying to impersonate him via what you see in a video. Um, like it just strikes me as like, okay, this guy is an actor, playing a part of a wrestler named Ric Flair,
Hmm.
and it's not that simple. And we all know that like we've seen people like Jay Lethal and countless others do Ric Flair impersonations over the years in a way that's more accurate than what this guy does. So
It was very low energy. The delivery was off. The timing was off. And I was going to say about the same thing as you. It seems to me like he just read the script and went, "Oh yeah, I get who this is,"
right.
and didn't really go into it. And Young Rock, that Ric Flair sucked too. It's because Ric Flair is hard to get. You know what they should have done is take Ric Flair and did the de-aging CGI to him.
Either that or well, yeah. You can't. I guess it would have been too awkward to put somebody like Jay Lethal in there, but he
Yeah,
would have nailed it though. Um,
yeah. And another thing too is always Flair's depicted as being really skinny, and he wasn't.
right.
If
He's
you
the
go back and you look, I mean, he didn't have a body like Hogan, but he was built back in the 80s,
yeah,
and he always seems to be portrayed as being really skinny.
yeah,
Anytime he pops up in something, and I'll segue. As bad as that dude was, that's how good the guy playing Harley Race was. That guy looked like Harley Race, sounded like Harley Race, acted like Harley Race. The way he delivered that promo, the way he was holding the belt, totally spot on. That's a guy that looks like he sat down, watched tons of tape, made notes,
yeah,
and that's how he played it.
yeah. I
So,
agree.
it's really interesting to see the dichotomy, those two guys. And you can make a movie about Race and Flair, you
Yep.
know, which would be interesting. So it's really interesting that they were just on opposite ends of the spectrum from each other on the way those portrayals were.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that guy up because he did a really good job as Harley Race, and like I forget some of the comments my wife made about Harley Race in general because she probably had not even heard of Harley Race before this because I certainly don't talk about Harley Race a lot, but like
Mhm.
she was I had to tell her I was like that was legit one of the toughest guys in wrestling, and but yeah, he did a great job, and it really reminded me of some of those Harley Race promos. So my other gripe with the movie, and it's a gripe that I understand, but I'm still going to mention it. And others, some people might disagree with me. In fact, a couple of people on the podcast will disagree with this, and other people, including the director, obviously, will disagree with me. Obviously, certain things needed to be cut because of it being a movie runtime, and I understand that, and I understand the other part of why a certain thing was cut, and I'll mention that after I detail this, and that is I think Chris Von Erich should have been left in this story. Um, I really, really do, because I think that leaving him out is doesn't is kind of a disservice to his memory. And I understand, on the other hand, why Jack, I believe his name was left out. That happened much earlier. The first brother that happened much earlier.
Yeah, that is referenced by Kevin because that was when they were kids.
Right.
And also Jack does get a cameo, you could say.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
so they mentioned that, and I understand why that wasn't explicitly shown. This was telling a certain timeline of a story. Um,
Yeah.
and but I think the director, I read a quote from him, and he, like, the quote basically was, I'm paraphrasing, was that they thought that the story was already sad enough. Guess what? It is a sad story. it is a sad story, and that is why I think Chris should have been left in. I think his story is important, and I think it just it fits more with the fact that this is like a great American tragedy.
Mhm.
And I understand time wise, it would have been tough. I get it, but so although I don't know how many points I would take off of the movie, my star rating or anything for something like that, I wanted to mention it because
Mhm.
I think he is an important part. I do.
If you didn't bring it up, I was going to. And I think that, I feel some of Chris was incorporated in Mike. I think
Yes,
some of Chris's suicide was incorporated in Carrie's.
yes,
Because after reading up on it afterwards, it seemed like some of the details, like Kevin and like in the movie, Kevin and Carrie have a heart to heart,
mm,
where in reality, it was Kevin and Chris that had the heart to heart.
mm.
And Kevin found Chris while it was Fritz that found Carrie. So I think they incorporated some of those elements from that.
That's true.
Um, and I was kind of when I was watching, I was also thinking too. Well, where do you put Chris? And Chris would have been, I think, a background character. I
He
think
would
he
have.
would have been at the breakfast table. He would have been in the car going to David's funeral, that type of thing. And then I think you would have a scene after Mike's illness, after Mike's illness and Mike's death, where Fritz is forcing Chris to wrestle, and Kevin's like, no, and Chris wants to because from everything I read, Mike never wanted to wrestle, but Chris did,
Right.
and Chris was small, even smaller than Mike was.
Yeah, and
Chris
he's
was
in
very
a lot of
small.
the footage of matches at the end. Like you
Mhm.
can see Chris around. Like he wanted to
Yeah,
be around it a lot.
yeah. So I think you would have got that scene, and then it would be a following scene where he's depressed about David and Mike, and he's depressed about how he couldn't make headway. And I think you could get a scene with him and Kevin where he goes, I'm not as big as you, I'm not as strong as you, I'm not as good as you in the ring, all these things. So you could have worked him in. Yes, does this add to the runtime? Definitely, because I don't think there's anything else you would want to cut.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. It's a catch 22, and like that's why I say I get it. I get why the decision was made. Um, you know, but I think he is worth mentioning in that regard. And the way I described the Von Erich brothers individually to Steph was, and I might be missing part of it, but like in one of the documentaries, they kind of described it as follows: like David was the talent, Carrie was the star, and I believe Kevin was either the athlete or the leader. One of those adjectives
Mm-hmm.
was played.
Kind of how I explained it to Jenny was David was the promo and Carrie was the look and the body and Kevin was the best in the ring.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it too. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
uh, and it's like I said, we've reiterating points here, but it's a tragic tale, but it's one that I'm glad people are hearing about, because I think that it also speaks to uh, family and family unity and how hard parents can be on kids, and how important it is to enjoy your time with somebody while they are there. And in interviews, Kevin will say that he's just glad to have known them. And
One thing they didn't mention at the very end, they kind of gave some, credit text. And again, this was stuff I had to tell Jenny that Kevin's sons wrestle
yep.
and that one of Carrie's daughters entered the business as well. So I was very surprised they didn't mention that.
Yeah, and they kind of like, I think, and David had a child that I guess died either in childbirth or shortly thereafter. If you look on Wikipedia, and Carrie had a child, Lacey, and yeah, there's a lot that they weren't able to fit in, obviously. And again, these are all things that I'm surprised they didn't mention it, but I understand why they didn't. Side note, for people who watch AEW, they just had the Marshall and Ross Von Erich for kind of a one shot thing on Rampage, and they brought Kevin out for a
Oh.
spot where he was able to put the claw on Jack Swagger. So
The last time I saw Kevin was it was one of those Raw Legends nights, and he put the claw on Heath Slater.
yeah, and like it, it was cool to see. I remember that now. It was cool to see AEW do it as well. I think that the Von Erich, the Sons, I think they're with MLW. So
Yeah, they're with MLW. Yeah,
I don't know
I've
who.
never watched any MLW, and sometimes I kind of want to. And the Von Erichs are one reason why. Alexander Hammerstone's another.
Yeah, no,
So
I
they're
need to
tough.
check some more of that stuff out too.
Yeah, I need to find. We need to find some of that.
Absolutely. So yeah, overall, I would definitely give the movie thumbs up. I'm certainly not caught up on all my 2023 movies, but I would say this is one of the better movies I've seen in 2023, which overall is not a very good year for movies. So,
Hmm.
but I would say that this is definitely one of the better ones, and I do recommend people seeing it.
Complete side note: have you seen the Holdovers yet?
That is tomorrow's agenda as Leonard and I record this.
We watched that on Saturday night, so we'll have to talk about that once you see that. But
Absolutely.
I enjoyed that. I'll just say that much about that. But no, I agree with you. I'm very interested to see Oscar time. I know that it's earned some preliminary awards and some preliminary nominations. So Oscar time, I'd be very interested to see. Since it's a field of 10, I think it could get a Best Picture nomination. I
Yep.
definitely think Zach Efron will get a Best Actor nomination. And then in the supporting categories, I think it might be a toss-up. I think it's very possible that there could be some supporting nods there too.
Yeah, and I hope it does. I would love to see that. And so I'm going to toss it to Leonard here because we are going to just briefly talk about one of the more integral matches that is talked about in the movie, which is Kerry Von Erich winning the NWA World Championship from Ric Flair. And we're going to just talk about that match. So, Leonard, why don't you
Yeah,
take
so one reason I thought maybe we could talk about that match specifically is because it's not shown in the film. They kind of cut around it. So I found it's on YouTube. I'm sure Chad will give the link to that. The entire video is 21:11. The match itself is only 11:24 of that. The rest is the intro and the outro. It's from May 6, 1984, Texas Stadium in Irving, Texas. Mark Lawrence is on commentary, and I believe this is the version that aired on World Class TV on ESPN, but it's the total match. So, just real quickly, a couple things I want to mention is one, the crowd here is nuclear. I have never seen, I've heard louder pops, but I've never heard a louder sustained pop
Yeah,
for the entire 15 minutes of since Kerry walks out to Kerry walks off is a sustained roar that
yeah,
is insane to hear and see. And you do see dead spots in the crowd, but that's like far, far off. And considering how many people was on the field, it's an insane amount of people that are there. The other thing is I want to say about just the match itself. I'll summarize is that it kind of comes off as a bit of a basic match to me.
hmm,
Flair definitely walks Kerry through it, but it's well done. It's well executed. It's well paced. It tells the story of Flair. Basically, he's not giving Kerry a lot of credence. He doesn't respect Kerry. He doesn't think Kerry's any good. But Kerry has so much emotion and so much passion and so much drive from the fans that is what is pushing him. Because in the beginning, Flair is out wrestling him. Like Kerry's keeping up, but he's barely keeping up. And a cocky Flair gets caught with a backslide. And at first I thought, oh, that ending, that finish is kind of out of nowhere. But as I thought about it more, I said, yeah, that makes sense because Flair never saw it coming.
right,
He never saw it coming, and it's a fluke win, and that's fine. It can be a fluke win, and Flair winds up winning the belt back just in 16 days off
right.
of Kerry. But this match, I would give it about 4 stars out of 5, and that has a lot to do with the way they told the story and how the crowd was part of it. But your thoughts?
Yeah, I pretty much agree. I'd probably give it like 3 and 3/4 stars. Like you said, the match was pretty basic, but the story they were telling made sense. Like you said, that it was this kind of sudden win out of nowhere. That Flair was the arrogant champion, and Kerry was still coming up in the business, and he was able to get a win, and Flair didn't respect him. All that stuff I totally agree with. And going back to the movie for a second, like the movie really shows you how good Kevin was in the ring and how maybe still rough around the edges Kerry was in the ring.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of like a background note for this match. But yeah, the crowd really makes this match and makes it a lot of fun to watch as a result. And just to kind of add another context, I didn't tell Leonard to watch this, but right before we got on here, I was like, I want to try and watch one of the Kevin Von Erich versus Ric Flair matches. And so I did watch one of those, and it is overall a better match, longer.
I'll have to find that and watch it. I actually did today watch one of the Von Erich versus Freebird matches.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I think
I
some people
believe
are
I believe it's a rematch from the one shown in the movie because the Freebirds win the belts back.
yeah, yeah. And one of my next things that I'm gonna watch is for sure one of the Kevin versus Harley Race matches, just because I'm curious. Especially that era of Harley Race. I only know a few matches, so but yeah. But as far as the Kerry versus Ric Flair match, it was a very short title reign, but it was an important one and one that was exciting for the area of Texas and for the family. Obviously, being at that time anyway, it was in the wake of David's death, and so they capitalized on that in a good way. Um, so yeah, it was a lot of fun to watch, and I'll put the link in our description, and absolutely go check out some of these matches. And it's fun, Leonard, to look at the comments of some of these matches now because so many people are in the comments section because of the Iron Claw, which I I think is a great thing. I truly think that that's a great thing that people
It
are
is.
going to look at some
Mhm.
of this content as a result of seeing the movie. So yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think anytime, especially too, if a movie gets remade and people find the original, or
Yeah.
if it's based on a true story like this and they go back and they look at stuff, that's introducing people to new content they didn't know about, and it's keeping the stuff alive. So yeah, I didn't read any of the comments. I may have to go back and do that, but I love it that people are finding it.
Yeah, and I believe the documentary the WWE did was called "The Triumph and Tragedy of WCCW."
Something like that. Yeah.
I think I've got that right. So yeah, definitely go check that out if you want a fuller, longer tale of the territory overall. Um, but uh, but yeah, go see the movie, go watch some of these matches, let us know what you thought of them, and we really appreciate any and all feedback. We're also available wherever you listen to podcasts, and we have other little videos that you can see as well, segment surgery, random match reviews, which is kind of is, but and stupid questions, and what's that card. So check all those out, subscribe to our content, hit the like button. And for Leonard, my name is Chad, and we will see you next time.